My ex-wife and my daughter spent 4 years calling me a loser for being broke after the divorce. Now they beg to be family again after I became rich? My ex-wife Nadine and I divorced when our daughter Zoe was 13. Nadine initiated it. The marriage ended, and I got the worst end of everything. She kept the house because Zoe was in school. I got weekend custody, a support payment that took half my paycheck, and a 1-bedroom apartment 20 minutes away. I worked as an equipment operator at a paving company. Decent work, honest money, but after child support and rent, there wasn't much left. I drove an old Tacoma with a cracked windshield. My furniture was secondhand. I wasn't living badly. I was living within what I had. Nadine remarried a year later to a guy named Cliff, who sold insurance and made good money. Zoe got her own bathroom, a new laptop, a car on her 16th birthday. Cliff paid for everything. That's when Nadine started talking about me differently. She'd tell Zoe that Dad doesn't have the same resources. She'd say, "Your father does his best, but his best has a ceiling." Zoe repeated these to me word for word, not to be mean at first. She was a kid repeating what she heard, but between 14 and 16, the repeating turned into believing. The first time Zoe said something that cut me was the summer she turned 15. She was supposed to spend 2 weeks with me. I'd planned fishing, cooking together, a day trip to the coast. She showed up, looked around my apartment, and said, "Dad, why does it still look like this?" She said Cliff redid their basement, and it looked like a magazine. I told her my place was fine. She said, "I know, but it's kind of sad." That word hit different coming from my own kid. By 16, she started canceling weekends. The excuses got thinner, and the visits got shorter. When she came, she'd sit on my couch, look at her phone, and ask to be driven back early. I asked once if everything was okay between us. She said, "Dad, I love you, but I don't really like being here. It's depressing." I just drove her home. The worst came on Christmas. She was 17. I bought her a necklace, simple gold chain, small pendant, picked it carefully. She opened it at Nadine's house during the holiday exchange. Cliff had given her a new phone and a designer bag that morning. She opened mine, looked at it, and said, "Thanks, Dad." Then turned to Nadine, and in a voice she thought I couldn't hear, said, "This is so embarrassing." Nadine didn't correct her, just gave a tight little smile and looked at Cliff. I drove home and sat in the parking lot for a long time before going inside. After that, I stopped pushing. Still called, still texted, still showed up. But Zoe made it clear she didn't want to be around me. She told her friends I was broke, told Nadine she wouldn't bring anyone to my apartment because it was humiliating. She was 17 and ashamed of me for not having enough money. I was never broke because I was lazy. I was broke because the divorce took everything, and I was rebuilding while paying support for a kid who couldn't stand to look at where I lived. The shift happened when Zoe was 18. A guy I'd worked with named Oren started a paving and excavation company and needed a partner who knew equipment. He offered me 30% ownership to run field operations. I put in every dollar I'd saved. Within 8 months, we landed a county contract worth more than I'd made in the last decade. Within a year, I was pulling in more than Cliff. I bought a house, not to show off. I wanted a yard and a kitchen with a window. Got a new truck. Put real furniture in every room. I didn't tell Nadine or Zoe. I didn't owe them a report on my finances. Nadine found out through Zoe's cousin who saw my new place. Suddenly things changed. She texted me for the first time in months. Not about Zoe. Asked how I was doing. Said she was happy things were going well. Then mentioned Cliff had been laid off and things were tight. Asked if I could increase my support contribution even though Zoe was 18 and I was no longer legally required to pay. I said no. A week later, Zoe called me. First real phone call in almost a year. She was crying. She said she missed me and she was sorry for being distant and she wanted to come see my new place. She said she'd been thinking a lot about how she treated me and she wanted to start over. I told her I was glad she called. Then I asked her something. I asked if she knew about my new house before she called, and the silence stretched long enough that I could hear her breathing change. She finally said, "Elliot mentioned something about it and she wanted to see it." The disappointment landed harder than anger because for 30 seconds I'd let myself believe she actually missed me. I told her we couldn't pretend the last year didn't happen and she needed to think about why she stayed away when I lived in the apartment she called depressing. Her voice went sharp, saying I was being unfair and she'd been busy with college. I asked what changed between last month when she wouldn't return my texts and this week when she suddenly wanted to reconnect, told her we could talk when she was ready to be honest, and ended the call. 2 days later, Nadine texted asking to meet about Zoe, first direct contact in 8 months. We met at a diner off Route 9 and she looked different, circles under her eyes, neat clothes but not the designer stuff she used to wear. She explained Cliff's layoff came without severance and their savings were almost gone, said my support payments ending left them in a difficult spot. She seemed to believe this was my problem. I said the support ended because Zoe turned 18 and that was the law. She left 20 minutes later. Saturday morning, Elliot showed up, Zoe's cousin on Nadine's side, always decent to me. He brought coffees and we sat on my deck steps. He told me the layoff story wasn't true. Cliff got fired for poor performance after missing quotas 3 quarters in a row, and Nadine had been working double shifts to cover their mortgage. He said he'd tried telling Zoe years ago I was a good father who got screwed in the divorce, but she wouldn't listen. He apologized for not speaking up louder, said watching my family treat me like garbage while he stayed quiet had been eating at him. 2 weeks later, Zoe called again, sounding calmer. She apologized and started talking about missing our fishing trips, careful not to mention my house or money. I recognized the strategy. Same calculated tone Nadine used when she wanted something. The realization my daughter had learned to manipulate instead of being real made me sad more than angry. I told her I appreciated the call, but needed to go. Monday at work, Oren asked if my family was coming around now that I had money. He told me about his sister who only called when she needed bail money and said setting boundaries was the hardest thing he ever did, but also the best. That Saturday, cleaning out my storage unit, I found cards Zoe made when she was little. Her 7-year-old handwriting said, "Best daddy ever," next to a crayon drawing of us holding fishing poles, a stick figure with a baseball cap, and a smaller one with pigtails holding my hand. I sat on the concrete floor with rain drumming on the metal roof, reading every card, remembering the kid who loved me before she learned to measure people by bank accounts. Tuesday evening, Nadine called asking if I could help with Zoe's college expenses since I was doing so well. I asked if she remembered the Christmas Zoe called my gift embarrassing. She said Zoe was just being a dramatic teenager. I told her that moment mattered, that watching my daughter be ashamed of me because I didn't have enough money mattered. She said I was being vindictive. I hung up. Elliot stopped by Thursday with pizza saying Zoe was genuinely struggling. She'd cried after our last call and admitted she'd been shallow. He wasn't making excuses, just wanted me to know she was starting to understand. Sunday, I spent 3 hours writing an email to Zoe, laying it out plain. She needed to tell me exactly what she'd done during those 4 years, not general apologies, but specific things. She needed to understand why treating me that way was wrong, regardless of money, and show me through actions she valued me. Her response started with apologies, but turned into reasons. Nadine influenced her. She was young, didn't understand. The last part said she shouldn't have to prove herself to her own father. She wasn't ready for real responsibility. I didn't respond. Wednesday, I had dinner with Natalia at a steakhouse. We'd met at a contract meeting 2 months back. She managed projects for the county, had a direct way of talking with no hidden angles. She knew about my situation with Zoe, but liked me for who I was. Ordering a good steak without checking prices felt different. Not showing off, just not worrying. I realized I was happy in a way that had nothing to do with proving anything. Friday night, I reconnected with Rodney, who'd worked equipment at the paving company when I was barely scraping by. He brought up lending him $200 when his kid needed medicine, even though I didn't have it to spare. Said money didn't make me a better person because I was already solid. Hearing that from someone who knew me during my worst years hit different than expected. Elliot told me Zoe had to drop her sorority because Nadine and Cliff couldn't afford the dues. She was devastated about losing her social status. Part of me felt vindicated. She was learning what it felt like to be judged for not having enough. But mostly I felt sad it took this for her to understand what she'd put me through. I didn't reach out because this was a lesson she needed without me rescuing her. 3 months went by. I kept working, seeing Natalia, having dinner with Elliot and his wife, fishing on weekends. Then a real letter showed up from Zoe. 4 handwritten pages about specific things she'd said and done. How cruel it was to call my apartment depressing. How wrong it was to say my gifts were embarrassing. She wrote about losing the sorority and realizing what it felt like to be valued only for money. The letter felt raw instead of calculated, like she'd actually spent time thinking instead of reacting. We met at a diner halfway between our places. She showed up on time in jeans and a sweatshirt. We talked for 2 hours, and she was more genuine than I'd seen her in years, admitting she'd been a spoiled brat who bought into Nadine's worldview without questioning it. I acknowledged her growth and said we could try rebuilding if she was serious. 2 days later, Nadine showed up uninvited, demanding to know why I was poisoning Zoe against her. Apparently, Zoe told her she was wrong to judge me for being broke. I told Nadine she wasn't welcome, and if she kept interfering, I'd stop trying with Zoe. She left without another word. I told Zoe our relationship needed boundaries and had to be gradual, built on actions over time. She said she understood trust takes time. We agreed to meet monthly. At our next lunch, she told me she got a part-time job at the campus bookstore, said she needed to learn to support herself instead of depending on other people's money. She started texting about random things, class, books she was reading. She remembered to ask about my work. She admitted she still fell into old patterns sometimes, but was trying to unlearn years of beliefs about money and worth. I appreciated her honesty because it showed she was being real, not pretending to be fixed. 4 months into rebuilding, I invited her to meet Natalia at dinner. They talked easily about books and hiking trails, and watching them connect made me hopeful. 6 months after that first phone call, we had a cautious but real relationship built on honesty instead of obligation. She was still working through her values, but making genuine effort. I'd learned I didn't need her validation to know my worth, and that made it possible to love her without needing her to be perfect. We were planning a fishing trip to the lake where we used to go when she was little. She said she remembered those trips differently now. This time it felt like we were both showing up as our real selves.